Before we get into the finer points about the Cardinals, as this team comes out of spring training and there's some turmoil with the injuries in the outfield, especially, has that changed your view of the Cardinals and like how good they could be this year in in the Central Division? Where do you see them, generally speaking, going into the season? Not so much how they're going to do early, but just where do you see them being at the end of the road in after 162?
I mean, I still feel like they should be contention for the Central title. I don't know if I just would give it to them, but I think they should be right there in the running. I mean, I don't think it's a guarantee. I think there's definitely some question marks even without the injuries. I mean, people who maybe don't have bounce back years, people who you're counting on for bounce backs, and the pitching. I think there's still some question there as far as like what that performance will look like. And then you add the injuries on that. So I mean, yeah, I don't think it's a given, but I don't think that they're a team that you just look at and say, well, they're not even going to be in the running. I think, especially look at the rest of that division, they should be right there as far as competing for the division title. Now, if some of the injuries and things set them back early, they might have to dig out of the hole, and that becomes something interesting to see if they can do that. And if they can't, then what that turns the season into. But right now, I say they should be in it.
I agree with you. Post-Dispatch and STL Today baseball writer Lynn Worthy with us. You were down there on the ground every day in spring training in the Florida part. Just give us your impressions on Victor Scott II, your observations, the kind of player he is, what impressed you, what he maybe needs to work on. Also, just his demeanor, the kind of guy he is, the kind of competitor he is. So we wanted to get the no pun intended, the bird's eye view from Lynn Worthy on Victor Scott II.
I think, especially when you consider, how, I mean, people always point out, well, he's a college guy, so he's older. It's like, yeah, he hasn't played that much pro ball, but right. He still seems to me like he has a confidence about him, even with the limited amount of pro ball, not a cockiness, but a confidence. And he's also one of those guys who, like, is constantly feeling like he should be getting better. Like he's not somebody who's resting on whatever laurels there are at this point in his career. That's far from it. I mean, I remember talking to him about defense, and you're talking about a guy who won a minor league Gold Glove, and he was talking about these different things that he wanted to work on, whether it's jumps, different aspects of things. He says because he knows people look and say, okay, well, he's good at defense because he's fast, and I know I'm pretty sure I quoted in a story probably a week or two ago where he said, well, his goal is to make sure that he does all these other things so well that you can't say that. Like that's the type of guy he is, where he's driven, he's motivated, he's confident in his ability, but he's just trying to get better. Yeah, I mean, to me, he's one of those guys who can be an exciting player, just because of the different skill set that he has. I think one thing that because of speed and everything, you think that he's maybe one of those sort of lighter. Like people make the Billy Hamilton comparison, but I mean, I actually covered Billy for a part of a season when he was in Kansas City, and Billy's thinner, leaner, longer type guy. This guy here is more like he's not real thick, but he's not one of those guys where he's got just like real thin arms and legs and stuff like that. No, he's put together a little bit. So this is a different body type than a Billy Hamilton, because I know people, at least I've heard people mention that one a lot.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Because he started to showcase some power last season in the Arizona Fall League in particular. The scouts were really impressed by how hard he was hitting the ball. He definitely has some strength. And, the other thing about him that I just noticed, and me, man, I'm a numbers nerd. I can't help it. In the minor leagues last year, he actually, and again, we're talking, I know, A and double A ball, but he did a good job against left-handed pitching. He's not a guy that, it's like, well, he can only play against right-handers. He can't even touch lefties. Now, maybe that'll be a big challenge at the major league level. But it seems like he's got a good base, and he will bunt left-handed pitchers into the ground. He's got some ways to kind of whatever weaknesses he might have against them. He's got some ways to torment him, and that's why he's such a unique player. The Cardinals really don't have anybody like him.
Yeah, and I remember, and it's anecdotal, but I mean, there was one of those games down spring training in I think it was at in West Palm Beach against the Astros, and Hader comes out. You talk about a lefty a closer who's able to come at guys, and he stood in there and had himself. And I think Ollie Marmol referenced it multiple times, just that he was impressed by the quality of at bat that he had against a guy like that. And ropes a single to, I think it was a single to right field, and it's like, okay, that's not like he's not trying to lay down a bunt. He's not just like, okay, let me try and get a productive out. I was like, no, this is like a quality at bat against a big time pitcher. Again, it's anecdotal, but I mean, like he's not a guy that they're just like, oh well, in certain situations you just sort of just punt on him being able to do anything for you. He's not that type of guy.
Lynn Worthy was from the Post-Dispatch STL today. Your first year on the beat in St. Louis covering the Cardinals. Wow. You weren't expecting that. I don't think anybody was. 71-91, but also a really bad 71-91. I want to ask you this, and the obligatory warning. It's only spring training, but do you pick up on a different vibe with this team? We're talking about whether it's clubhouse culture, leadership, things of that nature. Do you think there's a difference now that will serve them well going into the new adventure of 2024?
I think so. I mean, and it's hard to tell too, just because last year, and I know people sometimes look at it as an excuse-making thing, but I'm just talking about as far as making a comparison. It's different because last year a lot of the guys weren't there for a lot of camp, whereas this year everybody's there for the full time. So that right there is a big difference, at least to me, as I try and talk about what sort of a sense there is, because you had all those guys gone for the WBC last year, so they weren't actually in camp. But then I think there's there's some guys who are just more settled in too. Like I'm thinking off the top of my head of Wilson Contreras is definitely more settled in than last year. I think some of the younger guys are have a little bit of a year under their belt, or a guy like Nolan Gorman has more than that under his belt now. So I think there's that. But then you also have more veteran presence than you had last year when you talk about Carp and Crawford and Lance Lynn and Gibson and some of those guys. So I think there is a different feel, different vibe. And obviously time will tell how much of a difference that makes, but I definitely do feel like there's a difference. But again, like I say, I think part of that too is like there was definitely going to feel different because everybody's here this year.
Lynn Worthy with us. I want to ask you about this. The Cardinals do have an older team. It's not just the 5 starting pitchers, but they added Crawford and they added Carpenter. And, of course, Goldie is getting up there. Arenado turns 33 next month. I don't know who I'm leaving out. But they definitely do have an older team. Do you think that that's a factor one way or the other? It'll help them? It'll hurt them? I mean, just your general thoughts on that.
I think that helps in terms of just being like the experience, the fact that they've been through a lot of things, they've got an accomplished group, and I think there's enough of a mix when you think about just if you were to even look at up the middle when you got like a Nolan Gorman, a Mason Wynn, and now it's going to be Rick Scott for at least a period of time. That's a youthful group right there. You add in Jordan Walker. I mean, and you'll have some other guys, whether that's early in the year, Alec Burleson. These guys aren't, old timers, and I think there's enough of a mix, but I think there's the experience is important, as assuming that they're producing. I mean, experience just for the sake of experience isn't going to get you anywhere, but assuming those guys produce and, they've been some of the best, at their particular spots, of the current age right now when you're talking about Arenado, Goldschmidt, those types of guys. But yeah, I think that having that age does help. I think on the pitching side, assuming that it gives you more of a level of predictability of what you're going to get from those guys one way or the other, I think it helps as far as just being able to sort of plan things out, map things out, and know what you're going to get from a guy on a regular basis, as opposed to a lot of the variance and the ups and downs that you have with younger guys.
Matt Carpenter seems very, very happy to be back with his team, so to speak. I know you had a chance to talk to him. What kind of impressions do you have, and how have you in what ways have you seen him sort of execute one of the things they're looking to for him, which is to be there as a touchstone of sorts for young players?
Yeah, I mean, he seems like, and I wasn't here to see the end of things the first go around, but he definitely seems like he is embraced the role that he has. It's not necessarily going to be an everyday guy. It might be a limited amount of time. Like he seems completely at peace with that. He seems to really want to lean into, talking to young guys, getting their opinions on stuff, talking things out with them, sort of, just wanting to help them settle into the big league, settle into, playing for the St. Louis Cardinals. He seems to really like that. And again, like I said, I wasn't here for the last time around, but it's noticeable to me that he seems to really want to do that. And then he also, at the same time, wants to play well. And he had a pretty good spring swinging the bat. So I think whether it's just little conversations, I mean, obviously there's a limited time that we're around, but I mean, you definitely do see him, having conversations with guys. I think it wasn't by mistake. I don't think that his locker in spring training clubhouse was right next to Mason Wynn's. So I think, just the little things like that, whether it's, talking to a guy about, what's going on, or I know even early on, I know Mason talked about them having some conversations, just, getting to know each other and where they're from, and some similar shared background, I think, stuff down there in the Houston area. And so, yeah, I mean, I think he seems to really be leaning into that. And if you hear from other guys, whether it's Ollie Marmol or different players, that, that they feel like there's value in having him as well.
Lynn, a couple more things for you if you have a couple more minutes. I don't want to keep you too long. Okay, thank you, man. Appreciate that. You mentioned Mason Wynn, and just wanted to ask you what do you think is a reasonable expectation for him defensively and offensively in his first full season?
I think defensively he should be one of the better defenders at that spot, and I think he could be one of the better defenders at that spot in the National League. I don't think that's I'm not saying that that's like if he's not, then there's something wrong. I think he has that ability to be that. Offensively, I'm still not sure. I mean, I don't put a whole lot into that little bit of time that we saw him last year, but this spring it also seems like he's been searching for some things at the plate. I know one time talking to him, he was talking about having them do a little bit of a different approach, but it didn't seem like that was necessarily carrying over into some of the games. So I think at the plate it could still be he could still be trying to figure some things out. I know that they've been trying to hammer home with him that, hey, we're not worried about your offense. You give us the type of defense that we feel like you can give, and we're not going to worry about the offense. That's at least to start. I think that becomes a lot easier if there's guys. If the Goldies and the Arenados and the Gormans and Contreras, everybody's doing what they have typically done. It becomes easier for you to not put pressure on Wynn if he has a slow start offensively. If those guys struggle and Wynn's, still trying to figure things out at the plate, then I think it becomes a little bit harder, especially if you've got another young guy in the lineup who's going to be trying to figure some stuff out and going through the growing pains. So I think the offense, it could be interesting. It could be, there could be some struggles there. I do think, he's got the ability to hit. I don't think that's, I think that's just going to be a thing that takes some time, and he's going to have to make some adjustments. But defensively, I think he's got the ability to be an elite defender, for a while at that shortstop position.
Ollie Marmol in 2022 really had a good season. I know it didn't end well, and that the game one of the Philly series with the bullpen fiasco or whatever. But last year, just anything that could go wrong did. It was a tough year for him and for everybody. And I know fans are down on him. I get it. But to me, it was an overall organizational failure. He gets the brunt of it, I think, because everyone knows Mozeliak, is DeWitt's. There's no way DeWitt's going to cash out Mo and all that stuff. But anyway, I'm sorry to ramble. What I wanted to ask you is that, given the hell he kind of walked through last year, where do you think Ollie Marmol's head is at going into this season? What did you observe about him in spring training that struck you as positive or just struck you different in a positive way, coming off of such a bad year for everybody?
I think it seemed like they were stressing a lot of the fundamental stuff. I mean, I don't think it was they're going to show up to spring training and going to start doing everything differently now because last year was a bad year and now they're going to reinvent the way they do baseball. I didn't see any of that. I think it was, if anything, it was just paying attention to a lot of little things that people have sort of associated with the Cardinals, whether that's defense or base running or just the finer points, the first and third plays and bunts, things like that. I mean, the detail stuff and you have the guys here again for the full camp, so that obviously benefits them too. But I mean, it wasn't like okay, now they're going to start doing everything different. I think if anything, it was more of a leaning into the finer points of the game. And then feeling like, that there's veteran leadership and, some guys that you can sort of count on what you're going to get from them. And then maybe even with some of these younger guys, like, okay, now you've been around for a little while, like, holding them to I don't want to say a higher standard, but expecting them to be more consistent. It's like, okay, you went through some growing pains before and sort of made some allowances for that. But it's like now, like, okay, you've been around for a little while. So it's like you're going to need to, step it up a little bit, or, you might not have a role. You might not, or your role might be a little bit reduced. I mean, so I think there's small things, but I don't think it's just, I wouldn't say it's business as usual. I think that there's some small differences, maybe some emphasis on, finer points, but not a wholesale change as though they're panicking because last year was a bad year.
And it is going to be interesting. I hope one thing they need to do for sure, we all agree on this, but I wanted to get your opinion on it. What's your confidence level in this defense being a lot better than what we all watched last season?
Well, I think one of the things that they were going to hang their hat on was just having more stability defensively. And the injuries are going to, make that sort of, impossible for the first part of the season. But I think that was one of the big things, and they said it from the very beginning, and it's one of the reasons that they said, hey, in winter meetings, Tommy Edmonds is going to be the starting center fielder, Lars Nootbaar in left, Jordan Walker in right. And they basically, back in December said, this is what our defense, what we plan on our defense looking like. And part of that was because last year the defense just dropped off to a level that they felt like the moving parts, the guys playing positions that they weren't accustomed to, it just sort of kept them from having a defensive standard that they typically had. I'm not sure how that plays out when the beginning of the season when you're going to have some different people in there. I mean, I think you have guys who are capable of playing defense that, if you talk about Victor Scott stepping in at center field, he definitely can go get the ball. Donovan may end up being the guy who plays a lot of left field, at least to start the season, and he's been obviously a Gold Glove utility defender. He's played well at multiple positions around the field. So, I mean, they still have guys who have the ability, but I think the thing that they were hanging their hat on was, okay, you're going to have some stability from day to day. Guys are going to know where they're playing, and they'll be able to play at a higher level in part because of that. That's going to be a little bit up in the air to start the season. So that is one thing I'm sort of interested to see how it plays out, because I still think they have guys who can play defense at a high level. It's not what they had sort of mapped out as far as a stable defense. I know a lot of people said, well, that's one thing that they could have had last year that might have made a big difference.
Yeah, no doubt. And do you anticipate a bounce back of sorts for Arenado? That was a weird year for him last year, and his defense did improve as the season went on, but it was still weird just to see him not be one of the better third basemen. What do you think we can expect there? Do you think he'll sort of return to form defensively?
I think so. I mean, I think part of it was a different, the timing, getting started a little bit earlier, ramping up earlier last year. I think part of it was also he's still trying to find the balance between, he's getting into his 30s, and he still is one of those guys who just would take, ground ball after ground ball and stay out there and doing a lot of work. And it's like, well, you have to find that balance between wearing yourself out and keeping yourself sharp and fresh, but not doing too much before games on a daily basis to keep you, able to perform throughout the season. And I think he even admitted it early in the season. And One of the things that was interesting was he said, I think it was, guys like Carp and other guys, some of the other veterans, were part of what they were going to be doing was holding him accountable for not wearing himself out and for being able to pull back, because he said that for a couple of years now that he needs to be able to pull back on some of that stuff, but hasn't necessarily done it. But that's going to be one of the things he's looking to some of these other guys to like hold him accountable for doing that and for sort of like pacing himself a little bit better than maybe he has in the past. So I do think he should have a bounce back year. I think defensively for sure. And I know that's something that did not sit well with him in the offseason. So I would expect there to be a bounce back there.
Lynn Worthy, thank you as always for being a kind gentleman, coming on with us when we invite you, and we appreciate your work very much. And I know that Team Post-Dispatch, Team STL today is going to have a great season. Not sure about the Cardinals yet. I know you all will be. You'll be a first-place level team. There's no doubt about it. So have a good season, man. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
All right. That's Lynn Worthy, class act. Really enjoy his work. And, he's had some good insight into some of that stuff, right? I thought it was good insight. We'll get a break out of the way here, but I was trying to look. He said something, Lynn did, about talking about Victor Scott. He said, people always sort of want to bring up Billy Hamilton. Hey, as Lynn Worthy said, Victor Scott II is, he's 5'10", 180. That's what he's listed. But he's really put together. There's some muscle there. I mean, there's some heft there. He's got a very, very athletic frame with some power, inherent power in that frame. So the Billy Hamilton stuff is all wrong. And now it's got me wondering, maybe we'll get some text message responses on this. Like, well, what's the prototype? We're not saying that, he's going to have the same kind of career as these players that are on a list. But I was looking at, all right, left-handed hitter. I entered the height range. I wanted to keep it as close to Scott as possible, so I went 5'10" to 5'11". He is listed as 180 pounds, so I put in 180 to 190 pounds. And there's a lot of guys and we're talking about the physical dimensions. There's a lot of guys who have stolen a lot of bases with that height and weight, who bat from the left side. But did the power ever come for them? Because I really think Scott's got power potential. 25 home runs? No. 18 home runs with a hell of a lot of doubles and some triples? Yeah, I could see that. And I don't know that I have a true comp. Obviously, I'm not going to do that in 5 minutes, come up with one. But you know who a Cardinal of fairly recent vintage was? Left-handed hitting, outfielder, center fielder. He was 5'10", 190. Well, actually, Victor Scott's 190. Ray Langford was 5'11" and 180. And Ray stole a lot of bases. He also hit for power. Now, I don't think Victor Scott's going to have Ray Langford's power, but this doesn't mean Victor Scott can't have good power seasons, over time. He's certainly not a slap hitter unless he wants to be a slap hitter to get on base. And sometimes he'll be smart enough to do that. He's got a good head for the game. You can tell that. I look at other guys where they steal bases, but I don't know if they're a comp or not. Like Michael Bourne, remember him?
Oh yeah.
He's around the same size. I will refrain from even bringing up, other than to bring it up in a kind of a fun way. Who was in that? Who was basically at that same size? Although later the pounds were a lot more. Tony Gwynn was that prototype. So we won't do that to Victor Scott the second. There's quite a few. I mean, there's quite a few, but it's like I'm trying to be realistic about it.
A name that popped in my head, and it's not even realistic, but I'm not saying he's as good a hitter, but he could run and he could hit, and maybe he has some similar powers. Tim Raines.
There's no doubt about it. And in fact, he was a guy that popped up on this list.
Oh,
too.
really? Okay.
Yeah. But I didn't mention him, so.
I just thought of him as a
Tim
comparable type of player, not a Hall of Fame player, but
Did he bat right or left?
He was a switch hitter. That's the only thing that was different.
That's right.
He was a
Okay.
switch hitter, yes.
I couldn't remember, and I should know that.
Yeah.
Then you have some guys like same size, like Juan Pierre, but Juan Pierre never really hit for any kind of power.
No.
You have Corey Patterson, but I hope Victor Scott II is better than Corey Patterson.
Yes.
Well, look, Corey Patterson wasn't awful; he was all right.
He teased everybody though. Everybody thought he was going to be better than he was.
A guy that had a little pop and certainly could steal bases. And another thing he did was aggravate the hell out of Cardinals fans. Niger Morgan.
Oh yes. Oh.
Right?
Yes.
How about we go on the Wayback Machine? Ralph Garr.
Ooh, Ralph Garr. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, Ralph Garr was 5'11", 185. Victor Scott's 5'10", 190. Right?
Yeah.
You look at Ralph Garr, like when he broke into the majors, he had a .313 slugging percentage in 1970 at age 24. Then it went up to .441, .430, .415, .503. That might have been he may have been that may have been kind of not the real thing, but he did hit for power for a few years, and then that kind of abated after a while. But for about 4 or 5 seasons, he hit for good power. I'm not saying that that's the comp I'm looking for. I'm just running some names out there who fit Victor Scott II's physical dimension. Seriously, that's all I'm doing right now. And then I'm seeing and I also entered in the search term, stolen bases, a lot of stolen bases in a season. But then I'm saying, okay, well, what kind of power range would we expect? And it's kind of all over the map. But a lot of these guys who could steal a lot of bases, bat left-handed, who are the same physical size as Victor Scott II, a lot of these guys, were putting up seasons where, they slugged 390, 400, 411, which isn't bad, especially if we're talking about a young Victor Scott II. But a lot of those guys also added more power as they went along, So yeah, it's an interesting thing to try to find that comp to keep an eye on. You're going to laugh. One that I thought of, and I looked him up, and I'm like, wow, damn, I know he could run because he was a Cardinal for a year. And I know he had some power, and his size is about the same as Victor Scott II. That would be Lance Johnson.
Oh, okay.
Remember him?
Yes, I do. Got traded to the Sox. Had a real good career with the Sox after he left.
Was that the Ricky Horton trade?
I think it was, yeah. I believe it was.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, he came to the big leagues at 23. Well, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
With the Cardinals, they traded him before the 1988 season. Boy, he did not – his slugging was not – he stole a lot of bases, but his slugging was kind of, the more he played, 367, 357, 342, that's not good. 363, 396, and then power started to take off for about 3 or 4 seasons. And, that was at a time where a lot of players were having their power take off. I'll leave it at that.
It did happen that way, didn't it?
So, all right.